Hi everyone, this is a tutorial to go through some of the basics of Rhino. The first thing I'm going to do is show you where you can download Rhino. So here I am on rhino3d.com, and what you want to do is go to the download section. Rhino works for Windows and for Mac operating systems, so you can just go in here and download Rhino. The evaluation is valid for 90 days, so that's quite a bit of time. So you can go ahead and download the Windows version here if you need it, or the version for Mac over here if you need it. There is also, I believe, a beta version, Rhino 8. I don't see it here, but we're going to stick to Rhino 7 in this class, so just go ahead and download that. This is a great website to also look at resources. For example, if you want to see what kind of things people do with Rhino, you can go to the gallery and browse around. You can see there's industrial, there's product design, industrial design, architecture. I believe you can also search for something. So let's say, for example, I'm searching for chair, and I can just filter like that, or just search for something. So that is the gallery. You can also read more about Rhino features here, and also there's some new features in Rhino 7. For those of you that have maybe worked with Rhino 6 in the past, you can check out some of the new features. We will be covering a few of those. Also, there is a great support site over here when you click on support, and tons of really great tutorials as well, if you want to look into those. And lastly, let's see, resources will take you to Food for Rhino, and these are plugins. They're also handy for when you're using Grasshopper and you're looking for some plugins for Grasshopper, etc., etc. It's a little out of the scope of this course, but if you're interested in looking at some of that content, please feel free. So let's go ahead and start Rhino, and what you will see is this dialog box. So it's giving you some standard templates to choose from. If you have modeled in Rhino before, you'll also see there's a recent tab where there will be some files that you worked on before. You can set a default template by clicking on, for example, if I hover over here, large objects meters, I can select that as the default template. I'm going to go ahead and choose large objects inches, and I'm going to make that my default template. So anytime I now open Rhino and I press new model, it's going to default to large object inches. Okay, so here we are. Here is the basic interface. I am working on a Mac, so if you're on a Windows, your interface will look a little bit different. If you are on a Mac and you do not have these tabs, I will show you in a minute how to change your interface preferences so that you see those. They're actually quite handy. I also have them so that there's a little bit more similarity between the Mac and the Windows version. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the interface. So like any other application, there is a menu bar up here, and you can see these are some of the things that you can do. You can draw curves and surfaces, solids and mesh. Here are some dimension tools, etc., etc. So that's the menu up here. The next menu we have are these here: grid, ortho, planar, gumball, etc. For the Windows version, you will go down here. They should be down there. Moving down, we have this area here. You can see command. I'm going to get into that in a minute. That's the command line, which is a very central part of Rhino and something very useful. And below this, you have a bunch of icons to create geometry with. Below that, we have what are called object snaps, and we can also refer to those as O-snaps. We'll definitely be using those a lot throughout the course. Then you will see your main window here. We have 4 panels, and you can think of those as windows into a view. And the default opens up as the top view, perspective view, the front view, and the right view. I'll get into that in a minute again. You can also change the views here, but if you only want to see the top view, you can click on top, and that's going to open up the top view. Here's the front view, the right view. If I want to get out of that view, I just double click on this tab and that will bring up all 4 views. Alternatively, you can click on this little icon here and that will bring all 4 views again. On the right, we have 2 panels. Once again, this looks a little different for Windows, but these are our layers. I will be talking about them as well in this tutorial. But you can see I can select the layers, I can double click and change the name to, let's say these are my walls, etc., etc. We'll get into that in a minute. And then underneath here is our properties. So for example, if I draw a circle, you'll see that this will contextually change to whatever object I have in here. Okay, I can show and hide these side bars with this icon here. If I wanted a bit more real estate, like so, and I can bring them back. And I think that's about everything. You can also, of course, move these panels. Let's say, for example, you have a lot of layers and you need a bit more visibility. You can open that up a bit. I can also drag these windows. So let's say, for example, perspective view is my main view. I'm going to make sure that that's the biggest view, and I'm going to just resize my other views. Let's bring that back to where that was. Okay, so that's the viewports. Let's look a little bit at navigation. So what I'm going to do is just, before I go into drawing objects or different objects in Rhino, I'm just going to pick a box real quickly, and I just drew a box in perspective view. And you can see the default is what's called wireframe mode. And that just basically shows me the wireframe that creates the geometry. Now, if I want to change that view, I can right click on this tab here and I can go to shaded or rendered or ghosted. So I'm going to choose shaded. And so what that is going to do is create a shaded object. Now it doesn't change for these views because I'll have to change that as well. So let's go to the top view and I'm going to say shaded. So I can change the views independently, which is quite handy. So I'm going to keep this one to wireframe. Some other view modes that are handy are ghosted, and that allows you to kind of see through the object. The color of your ghosted object might be different than mine because I have played around with my preferences, and I'll show you how to change that. But so what's great about ghosted is that, let me just draw an object here, I can see through it, but I can still sort of see what's going on with the outside geometry, but I can also see through the geometry. Let's compare that to shaded over here, so you'll see what the difference is, right? Okay, so that's a little bit about views. Right, let's talk about navigating now. So simply put, always make sure you have a 3-button mouse. You want something that has a scroll wheel in the middle and two buttons, a left and a right. So in order to zoom in and out in perspective, I can simply scroll away from myself or scroll towards myself to zoom out. So that's zooming, and that goes for all the different viewports. And I don't even have to select the viewport. I can simply hover over that viewport and start scrolling. So here I'm just simply using my scroll for zooming in and out. So let's go back to top view. So I'm scrolling in. The other thing I can do is pan. I can use this icon here, or I can right click and drag. Exactly the same goes for front. Zoom in and out, right click for drag. On the right, zoom in and out, right click for drag. But in perspective, zoom in and out, you'll see that right click actually rotates. So perspective has one more navigational function, which is rotate, because we're in perspective. We don't need that in any of the other of the viewports. So in order for me to pan, I hold down Shift and right click. So Shift and right click is pan, and just right click is going to be revolve. You can also find those icons here. Here is, rotate view, here's pan, here's zoom. I hardly ever use these icons. It's good practice to really get to know the shortcuts. Okay, so The next thing I wanted to talk about is how do we create things, objects, geometry in Rhino. There are a few different objects, and we'll get more into that in the 2D lesson. But I want to talk about how you can actually create objects. There are 3 ways you can create objects or geometry. And the first one is up here on this menu. Let's say I want to draw a circle. I would go to Curve, Circle, and this is telling me how the circle is defined from the center and then the radius. So I click on that. And you'll see that this panel here changed to my sort of command line and all the options I have of how I want to draw a circle. It's asking me for the center of the circle, and I'm just going to, with my grid snap on, click here in the center, and now it's saying, what is the radius? And I'm just going to drag out, and there is my radius. So that's one way of creating a circle. The next one would be to go down here to Curve Tools, and let's see if I can find circle. I actually don't see circle on here. I guess I have to go here. So I would go here and I draw a circle. Alternatively, if I don't have this tab on and I'm in standard, you'll see that here's circle, circle, center, radius. So that's the second way how we can create geometry. The third, and I think the most useful way, is using the command line. Unlike many programs or applications that you might have used, this might be a little new for you, but Rhino is a command-based program or application, and that means that I can type in commands that will, they sort of function like macros. They tell Rhino what to do. So for me to draw a circle, I can just simply start typing CIR, and you see there's circle. Now, one thing that a lot of beginning students do is they go to the command line, they click in the command line, and they start typing. You don't need to do this. I could be anywhere and just start typing circle. It speeds up the process a lot. So here's circle. I'm going to press enter. And I can do everything now with my keyboard. It's asking me for the center of the circle. So I'm just going to type 0. And if I just type 0, that means X is 0, Y is 0, and Z is 0. And you can see there is my point in the center of my perspective view. It's asking me for a radius. What if I wanted to draw a diameter? Well, you can see on the left there it says diameter, and under the D there's a little line. That means that if I click D on my keyboard and then enter, now it will allow me to put in diameter. So let's say instead of 34.93, I want a diameter of, I don't know, 12.89, something random, right? And then I press enter. And there is my circle. And I can do that with many, many objects, a lot of geometry, and simply by typing in. So let's say, let's do another 2-dimensional object like a rectangle. Rectangle, where do I want this one to be? Let's say I want this one to be 0, 5, 5. And then I'm going to make it 50 and 50 in the length and 50 width. And there we go. Now, what you will notice is that, let me just go to the top view here. What you will notice is that my rectangle is sort of hovering. And that is because I typed in 0, 5, 5. So 0 for X. And then I went up 5 units in the where's the Y? 5 units in the X, in the Y, and 5 units in the Z, right? So 5 units in the Y, you can see here, here's the Y, and 5 units in the Z. Okay, so you see it's kind of hovering there. Okay, maybe now's a good time actually to show you selection. So what I'm going to quickly do before we go on with more of the commands, the command line. So what I'm going to do is just really quickly, I'll get back to the gumball in a minute. I'm just going to draw a bunch of, a bunch of rectangles here to show you some selection techniques. So Rhino has 2 ways of selecting. I can either drag from the top left to the bottom right, or from the bottom right to the top left. Notice how it's different. The one that I'm selecting from the top left to the bottom right has a solid line around it. Whereas if I click and drag up from the bottom right to the top left, there's a little dashed line around it. So what this means is anything that is inside this window will be selected. So you can see that right now. So let me do that again. I'm going to open up this top. So I'm dragging from the top left, and the only thing that is totally contained in this window is that top square. So that will be selected. If I select from down here, everything this box touches will be selected, right? So let me just do that once more. Let's do the top two. So top two, it doesn't matter. I have all of these selected as well, but none of them, this one, this one, this one, and this one is not inside the box. It's only going to select those two squares. Whereas if I select from here up, everything that this box touches, everything that these dashed lines touch is going to be selected. So that's a pretty quirky way of selecting things, and it might not totally make sense right now why it is this way, but it's actually extremely useful once you start modeling and you have many, many layers. Okay, that's making selections. I want to go back a little bit more to the command line. So let me just delete that because I just want to show you that even if I type in box, first corner of the box, and I'm going to make this a 50 by 50 by 50 box, you see that I also can draw three-dimensional objects with the command line. In addition, I can also do other things like scale, rotate, etc., with the command line. Okay, I will very, very quickly show you the very basic types of objects that you can draw in Rhino. The first one is two-dimensional geometry, which is some of the first tutorials that we cover, and that basically is in 2 dimensions, right? So it's planar. And when we do that, we're going to work mostly in the top view. For example, I could do a polyline. So there's a simple polyline, and you can see that is a 2-dimensional curve. We'll get into curves and NURBS-based modeling in later subsequent tutorials, but just to give you an idea of what the different objects are. So let me just go through here. So we have points. These are just locations in space. They don't actually have any weight. They won't print. They're literally just points in space. They're very helpful to model, to use as guides for modeling. Then we have different ways of drawing lines. For example, I can do a line from midpoint. That just means I'm going to draw a line like that. Then I have curves, and the most common one we'll use is the control point curve. So I'm putting down control points, and that's drawing a curve. And press enter when I'm done, and you'll see that is planar to the YX view. Next up, we have things like circles. I'm going through these very, very fast because I have a whole lesson on this. We have ellipses, we have arcs, and we have rectangles. So these are all primitives that are included, right? So you don't have to go polyline, and now I'm going to tediously draw a polyline, right? That's included. I say, okay, I can just draw a rectangle here. And then we have polygons here as well. So these are all 2-dimensional curves, and as you can see, each one of these is defined by control points. That is how Rhino draws geometry, right? So let me just delete those. The next category is what's called surfaces, and the most basic surface is a plane. So I just typed in plane, and as you can see, it's just a flat surface, right? It doesn't have any thickness. You could think of it as a piece of paper, but it's a little dangerous to make that assumption because paper still has thickness, right? So the way that Rhino works is, let me just draw a box here to demonstrate. So this is what's called a solid, right? Now if I click on this and I say explode, you'll see that it separates into surfaces. So now I can drag these surfaces away, it's a good time to show you Gumball. So I have Gumball selected, and I'm going to click on my Gumball. I'll get into that a little bit more, but you can see that when I drag these away, this box is made out of these surfaces, right? And when I drew it, all those surfaces were like, they were glued together, right? So when I exploded them, they turned into all these different surfaces. So let me do that with a different primitive. So here are 3D primitives, more about that in a second. Let's say I want to draw a cylinder. Here's my little cylinder, okay. So you'll see that when I move it around, it moves as an entity. Now I'm going to type in explode, and you'll see that I get these isocurves. And now you'll see that this is how Rhino draws a cylinder. We can also take something like this. So this is an open surface, right? And let's say I want to turn this into a solid. I can just select that and I can say cap. Okay. So that's surfaces. We'll get into that a lot more in future tutorials. There are, of course, other ways to draw surfaces, for example, and this is very much a way how we model. We start with 2D curves, we make surfaces out of them, and then we make solids out of them. It's a very, very classic way of modeling. For example, I'm just randomly drawing a circle. Here's a circle, it's two-dimensional. I can see straight through it, it's just a curve, right? Now let's turn this into a surface. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to type in planar surface. And planar surface, I'm telling it, make a surface planar to that curve. And planar means flat, right, in 2 dimensions. So there it created a surface. Now if I want to turn this into a solid, I need to extrude it. So I'm going to type in extrude surface. There it is, extrude surface. And I can tell it which direction I want to extrude it to. I can also tell it I want to extrude it in both sides. If I click delete input, it's going to delete the curve that I started with. I tend to not delete inputs so that I have curves to build more geometry from. So let's just say, here's my little cylinder. And there it is. So I can do that not just with primitives and with rectangles, but any kind of curve. For example, I could be designing some kind of crazy shaped building, and let's say I wanted to mask this, and so before I showed you how to take this curve and turn it into a planar surface, we can also directly take this curve and extrude it. And so instead of typing in extrude surface, we're going to type in extrude curve. Okay. Our options here are both sides, solid, delete input. I'm not going to talk about sub D in this lesson right now. But similarly, both sides, you'll see here in the right view, I'm extruding from both sides, right? But let's say I just want the one side, and that's it. And I can just extrude. And there is my mask that I created from this curve. Okay. Couple more things for this tutorial. We're going to look at layers. We're going to use layers a lot. So we're in the default layer, and you can see that it is selected with this radio button. Be careful if I do this layer is not selected. I'm merely, I'm making a selection, but that layer is not selected. I need to make sure I click on the radio button there. So you can see that the default is visible. This is how you toggle the visibility. So if I click on that, you'll see that it disappears. I can also lock my layers, and that's great for when you have reference images that you want to draw on top of. So you want to make sure you lock that. Right next to this, you have the layer color. So if I click on that, it's going to open up this dialog, and several ways that I can pick a color, but let's say I just pick blue. It's going to then change every object, every bit of geometry that I draw. Oh, see, I have layer 1 selected that is red. So that's why it's drawing it in red. So let's go back to blue, and let's draw another cone. And you'll see that this time it will draw in blue. if I click on this again and I change the color, it will change all the objects on that layer. I can also change the name of my layer. Let's say this is my reference image. Double click, this might be my exterior, or let's say this could be the plan. Maybe this is the section, etc., right? So I can sort of change the layer names there. Okay. Some other things I can do is change the print color, the line weight, but we'll get into that a little bit more in subsequent tutorials. Okay. I think I will show the gumball real quickly. So let's draw a box. So I'm going to change this color back to black. Okay, so I can select this box. Let's just shut the gumball off. And if I want to move this, I can type in move. From this point, I'm going to hook to that point. And actually, let's draw a point first. I'm drawing a point here. I want to move this box from this point to this point. I'm going to type in move from this point to this point. Now you see how it says point there, and that is because I have my O snap on, my point snap. And your O snaps are down here, and these are incredibly useful. We'll get into that in a minute. Let's talk a little bit about the gumball. So we want to make sure gumball is turned on, and any object I select in the viewport will then show the gumball. And what it consists of is these weird couple of arrows. So you can see there's a blue arrow, there's a green arrow, and a red arrow. And those kind of correspond to the 3 coordinates. And you can see down here, the y-axis is the green arrow, the z-axis is the blue arrow, and the x-axis is the red arrow. So I can move objects by dragging. So right now I'm dragging in the z direction. Right now I'm dragging in the y direction. Right now I'm dragging in the x direction. I can also be more specific. Let's say I want to move 50 units, so 50 inches because we're in inches here. In the y direction, I can simply click on the middle of this arrow. So the end of it is to move, and the middle of it, I can type in 50. Let's say 67. 67. Whoops, 67. So it's going to move 67 units to in the y direction. Let's say I made a mistake and I want to move back. I can simply just put a minus in front of that, minus 67, and it'll move it back. And I can do that with any of these, right? There I'm moving, let's say, 78 in the z direction, and I want to move back minus 20 in the x direction, etc., etc. Okay, so those are the arrows. Then you will see these little arcs, and those are for rotation. So here I'm rotating around the y-axis, right? And I can just do that by dragging. If I hold down shift, it's going to constrain in 45 degrees. I can also click on this and say, let's say 48, right? So now it's going to rotate at 48 degrees around that axis. And I can do that for the blue, the Z. So right now I'm rotating around the Z axis, right? So here's the Z axis, I'm rotating around it. And I can also rotate around the X axis. Step back a couple of times. The last thing I can do, actually 2 more things. So this little window here drags the whole object in 3 dimensions. So right now I'm just dragging it around in the X, Y, and Z direction, right? Instead of really doing one by one, this does all 3. And then lastly, we have these little dotted lines with the squares at the end. That's for scaling. If I just grab this one, I can scale in 1 dimension in the Z, right? Or I can scale in 1 dimension in the Y, or in 1 dimension in the X direction. If I hold down shift, I will scale universally. So that's the gumball. Pretty handy. Okay. I think the last thing I want to show is the object snap. So let's do a quick something here. I'm going to draw a circle in the center, something like that. Okay. Now, if I wanted to draw a line from the center to the quadrant. Let me just switch off all my O snaps here. Right now, I don't have any of my O snaps. I'm going to type in line. How do I know where the center is, right? I have no information here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my center snap, and let's type in line again. And now notice as soon as I hover, it's a little white line and it points to the center and it tells me, aha, you are now, if you click, you're going to start at the center. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to just click. And I don't have to be here and click. Once it says this, it's hooked onto the center. So I'm just going to click, right? Now, how do I get this quadrant? Well, very simple. I make sure I have my quadrant O snap on. And now I'm going to go around, go around, go around. Ah, there's my quadrant. It's snapping to the quadrant and I can click. There is one more useful aspect of Gumball. I'm just going to draw a quick circle in top view. Is I can quickly copy things. So I can copy things in different directions. So let's say I wanted to make a copy of this circle in the X direction. I simply hold down Option and I'm going to drag on this arrow here, and you'll see that it'll quickly make a copy of that circle in that direction. Similarly, I can make a copy in the X direction, and I can of course make a copy in the Y direction as well. Holding down Option. There we go. I think that about covers it for the Gumball. Yeah. One last thing I wanted to show, this is kind of an aha moment for many people to sort of understand all these viewports. I'm going to draw a quick plane in the top view. Now, watch what happens in the perspective, the front and the right view as I do this. So I'm simply going to type in 0. And I'm going, see, as I move my point, I'm going to hold down Shift because I want to draw a perfect square. And I'm actually going to have my grid snap on for this one. Okay, so what I did here is I drew a plane in the top view. It's planar to the top view, which means it's kind of stuck on that construction plane. And if I twist this around, you'll see that that construction plane exists in the Y and the X, right? The Y and the X. It's laying flat, which is why it appears like this in the front view and the right view. Let me turn this to shaded view. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing but in front view. So I'm just going to type in plane. I'm also going to start from 0. And look what happens. Watch carefully in the perspective view. So that is my construction plane. I'm just making visible where that construction plane is, right? So anytime I draw something in front view, let's draw a circle in front view. You see it's sticking to that construction plane. No matter what I draw, if I draw a curve, once again, it's on that construction plane. So this is my front construction plane, my ZX or XZ construction plane. And lastly, let's draw one here in the right side. So plane, starting from 0, oopsie, plane, 0. So instead of my front view or my top view, I'm in my right view. So let's do the same here, holding down Shift. So that is where my right plane view is, right? So anytime I draw something in one of these views, it's going to draw it on that construction plane. It's a little difficult to wrap your head around when you're starting out with Rhino, but you'll soon get the hang of it. And there are, of course, times that you don't want to draw on that construction plane. Maybe I have something like, let's see, I'm going to draw another plane from, actually, let's just copy it over. So copy this one here from this point to, see, I've got the center point there. So copy. Let's do end from this point to this point. So sometimes I might want to draw something on this plane here, right? So there are different methods that we can do that. But if I now go to my front view here and I type in circle and I start drawing a circle, you'll notice it drew it on that face there, on that plane, right? Makes sense? In addition, one last thing I didn't show is that you can change your views. Right now, this is my perspective view. Maybe I want that to stay that way, but maybe instead of the right view, so let's turn this to shaded as well. Let's turn all of these to shaded real quickly. And let's say I want to see the back, right, instead of the front. I can just right click here and I can say set view to back, right? So now I'm looking at this from this side, right? So you can change all of that. Similarly, this is the bottom view. So let me just draw a circle on here. Let's do that again. Okay, so there's my little circle, right? And actually what I'm going to do is just lift that up a bit. Okay, so obviously I can see the circle here because I'm looking at it from the top view, like that. Now if I go here and I change this to set view to the back, I won't see that, right? Because I'm looking at this side. So that's just something to keep in mind in the beginning. It's a little confusing at first. I know I had a little bit of trouble at the beginning, but hopefully this clears up a few things just in the very beginning. And we'll get into a lot of that in later tutorials. Okay, that's about it for now. And the next tutorial you should watch is the foundations of 2D drawing. And I'll see you guys soon.